Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a senatorial forum consisting of three of the candidates, Gerald Malloy, Justin Schoville, and Mark
I just
Stewart.
told it 12:15.
The forum rules are rather simple. There'll be a potential of 9 questions asked, and each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes. And I will hold up a sign of 30 seconds when you get down to 30 seconds or close to it, and 10 to give you a heads up on where you're at in your time. And that is pretty much it. At the end, we're going to target to do this in 1 hour. If there's extra time, you'll have more time on that last question, question number 10. So with that, we're going to start off with the first question. And Gerald, you're going to have the opportunity to be the start, and I will sort of rotate on who starts first on different questions. I'll try to rotate. Oh, if I don't lose track. Okay. Many have understood it would take an act of Congress to declare war with another country. However, our country has never actually declared war with Russia. The Ukraine war against Russia has been funded mainly by U.S. tax dollars. Supporting war has exceeded the U.S. tax dollars used to develop our own country's infrastructure, our healthcare system, housing, and education. The question: do you support the undeclared war effort against Russia and the congressional policies that divert our U.S. tax dollars to support war? Gerald?
Thank you. The answer is no. So first off, would not declare undeclared war against Russia. I do support our support of Ukraine in this really horrible situation that's going on over there, and I actually think it goes back to the foreign policy failure of our current administration, starting with the debacle that was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That led Mr. Putin to believe that he could get away with attacking, being an aggressor against Ukraine. Ukraine is an ally. From day one, I've supported the United States supporting Ukraine with military equipment, military aid, not boots on the ground, not funding. And what's going on here now, we're in the hundreds of billions, as you mentioned, just kind of being thrown over into a black hole without accountability. So I do not support stuff, particularly now with our $36 trillion debt. And as you mentioned, the national emergency and disasters going on, and the many things going on here in the United States. I don't agree at all with spending $200 billion plus support Ukraine. NATO countries, got good 15 of them surrounding Ukraine, can do that. Military aid, yes. Funding into a black hole without accountability, no.
Well, thank you very much. Justin, would you like to pick it up?
Sure. I do not support, similar to Gerald Malloy, I don't support just dumping money into a black hole, which is supporting Ukraine's war against Russia. I think it is a geopolitical battle that the U.S. is waging against Russia, and I think the United States and Western countries understand that at some point, Ukraine is going to have a negotiated settlement with Russia. And what that's going to look like, I'm not entirely sure. But Ukraine does not have the industrial capacity, doesn't have the manpower, does not have the financial wherewithal to be able to withstand Russia indefinitely. And at the time when the United States is supporting Ukraine, there is a continual threat of nuclear escalation, and that is something that no one wants to see. So, and I don't like what Russia's doing in Ukraine. I think it is unjust. I'm not in favor of undeclared wars from anyone, including the United States. And I'm not in favor of wars of aggression by any country, including the United States. So to answer your question directly, I would be in favor of the U.S. Congress reasserting their control over the war powers of the U.S. and taking that away from the executive branch. And more broadly with Russia, I would be in favor of reducing aid to Ukraine and that would be to push Ukraine to support a negotiated settlement so that it makes everyone safer and the war does not continue. Thank you.
Well, that makes three of us. None of the three of us are in favor of supporting Russia. And my heritage is Ukraine. Okay, my grandparents met in Kiev 120 years ago. It was therefore the policy of not aggressing should be an absolute. We are not under attack from Russia. We have no evidence of being even threatened by Russia. And I'd like to, as I did last night, ask people to personalize this, knowing that Russia has nuclear capabilities and one semi-stable Vladimir Putin man who could control the launches. Would you want to see half of Burlington decimated? Okay, one bomb on Plattsburgh kills most of us. Would you like to see, because this might be even more realistic, that your 19-year-old son is drafted into, at best, a mud hole, or at worst, a shooting spree that he can't escape? Because there is no draft technically now, but every male who wants government service is part of the selective service, right? That can instantaneously turn into a draft against your will. We should be foursquare against this.
Thank you, Mark. We'll move on to the second question. Voting. Many U.S. and Vermont citizens are concerned with illegal aliens being allowed to vote in this coming election. It used to be a requirement that in order to be eligible to vote for a presidential or congressional election, you had to be a U.S. citizen. It appears that getting a driver's license is all you need to have. A driver's license allows you to vote in our congressional elections while living in Vermont and several other states. Justin, would you start the response, please?
So I believe the question is, do I support a non-U.S. citizens voting in presidential and congressional elections? And the answer to that is, I mean, I think that would raise some issues with the integrity of our elections. So, I wouldn't want Canadians just jumping across the border and being able to vote for our congressional candidates or presidential candidates and being able to flip that result. So I think in general, I would not be in favor of that. Speaking of election integrity overall, I was a poll worker in Maryland in 2016. And I know that Vermont has different rules when it comes to the polls. But firsthand, I was able to experience kind of the security measures that they take place, at least in Maryland, that they had for election integrity and for making sure that ballots were properly counted. And it's incredibly decentralized. And I think that that's actually a very good way of running our elections. So I'm not afraid of illegal immigrants or immigrants in general or non-U.S. citizens being able to kind of flip our elections or have undue influence in our elections if that is a concern.
Okay. Gerald, do you support non-U.S. citizens voting in our presidential and congressional elections?
Thank you. No, I do not. Constitution is very clear. You have to be a citizen to vote in presidential and Congress, Senate elections. So I support that. I do support states' rights. I can tell you just yesterday, I was down at Springfield Correctional Institute, and Vermont and Maine are the only two states right now that allow incarcerated individuals to vote. I support that. And Vermont made that decision. I can support that, but I don't think that disagrees with the language in the Constitution. So my answer is no.
Thank you. Mark?
No. I mean, it should be a no-brainer. But let me go further. I don't think uninformed U.S. citizens should be voting. I think there should be a somewhat knowledge test. Do you know something about the candidate or something about the party? And if not, don't vote. our ballots right now, I believe, have 12 different categories. It's not just president, Senate, and the US rep. There are 9 other local things. And so I don't think you can change the law on this, but the morality of if you don't even know who's running for justice of the peace, leave it blank so that people who are in the know have more say, they care, they've researched, and we should probably defer to them. The deference is doubly deserved because Gerald has worked his butt off for 2 straight elections. To some extent, Justin and I have too, not as long. To have a vote for Gerald canceled out by an unknowledgeable, oh, you mean I can vote today? I mean, that's what late voting allows. You mean I just sign here and vote D for Democrat and then I can go home, or I can go home with some nice cake, cookies, maybe $5 bill attached? That's what unlimited voting does. It cancels out knowledgeable people with good reasoned votes. We should put an end to even that.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, abortion. And Mark, you're going to start this one off. Let me read the question. And for many Americans, it is not a black and white issue. When rape is involved, fetus abnormalities are involved, or the mental and physical health of the woman is involved. What is your position on abortion?
I have a long set of videos at stewartforliberty.com. Please go there for more. I urge it. One is called Higher Law, which I think is what really should govern over a state law or a federal law or even a local law. So stewartforliberty.com, because 2 minutes is not enough to address this. I'll address it somewhat though. I am pro-life. And I want people to personalize this. Would you want to have done to you what clinics do to tiny tykes in utero? That is asphyxiation or severing of your head. And if you wouldn't like to have that done to you, age 35-year-old, tell me what the big difference is. There is zero substantial difference between 5 months in utero and 10 months. 10 months means it is postpartum. This is a 1-month-old baby who is not significantly different other than inside a womb and outside a womb. We know that in utero, they feel pain. And I think all of us know that killing is wrong. So the rare I have an issue that overcomes killing better be one with knowledge. Doctors have knowledge that these are babies who don't deserve to be snuffed out. And I do believe in criminalizing their involvement. I don't believe it for women because often they are influenced by freaking 2 generations of falsities that, oh, they feel no pain. It's just a cyst. Well, it's different. Please look into it, everybody.
Okay, Gerald, would you like to respond, please?
Sure. I respect women's rights, women's health care, respect the law here in Vermont. Seeking to be a United States Senator under the Constitution, one of the major foundational principles of the Constitution is to let the people and the states decide. And so this is a state issue. I talked about this at the Williston Central School. I got a tough question from probably an 8th grader. And, you know, my answer part of it was what I just said, but frankly, there might be 200 million different ideas or solutions, you know, for an idea for this, frankly, controversial issue. I have my own, but I'm seeking to be a U.S. Senator, and I will operate under the Constitution. And I think that that is right, as particularly under the 10th Amendment, that this is a state issue.
Okay, thank you. Justin.
So the Green Mountain Peace and Justice Party respects the autonomy of women, and this means that our party believes that abortion should be allowed at any stage of the pregnancy. So we take a more absolutist position on that. And again, it's about respecting the autonomy of women. So that's what our party takes as a position, and that's what I would promote as U.S. Senator.
Thank you.
Can I ask for clarification? Justin, if you want to answer it, does the autonomy of women override the grand autonomy of a preborn baby?
In this case, I would say yes, because the preborn baby is not a U.S. citizen. The preborn baby is not a, in terms of autonomy purposes, I would say yes, because the woman is there currently and presently. The baby is not. So that is our party's position on that.
Thank you, Justin. Next question. Pandemic. During the COVID pandemic, many lost their jobs, came down with COVID after getting the vaccinations, and were restricted from going to church and forced to fall in line with the pandemic mandates and policies. Do you agree with how the COVID scenario was handled, and would you support the same mandates and policies if another COVID pandemic happened? Justin.
Our party doesn't have a position on this. However, the way that I view it is as a workers' rights issue. During the COVID pandemic, workers, and we're called essential workers, and we appreciated all the efforts that they put to put themselves in harm's way, and put themselves under a threat of getting infected over and over again. And I think that as a workers' rights issue, they should be protected against any kind of illness that they would receive on the workplace. So in that sense, I was in favor of the workplace protections that were put in place and the controls that were put in place to protect average and ordinary people and the vulnerable. Overall, I think that in order to, and this is a personal opinion of mine, I think in order to respond adequately to pandemics, that the U.S. Constitution should probably be amended to take healthcare power away from the states and put it into the federal government, and take it away from the out of the purview of the 10th Amendment. And the reason I would do that is because the COVID pandemic demonstrated that states were inadequately and responded inadequately to a fast-moving pandemic. And I think that the federal government needs more power to be able to respond adequately to it. And I think it would have responded more adequately to it if we had given the federal government that authority to do so.
Thank you. Mark.
I'll respond on the workers' rights basis. I'm big on workers' rights too. But because of state restrictions, some workers got fired if they refused to take a vaccine against their will. Nobody got fired, to my knowledge, for not showing up at work for a week or two. Okay, they had the right to excuse themselves. I don't feel comfortable in this workplace. But those who didn't feel comfortable inoculating themselves with a vaccine that was not well tried, warp speed was the name. Okay, that's not well tried, should never be mandated. And this is why I'm not a Republican. Because Republicans have a lot of good ideas going for them. But their support of Donald Trump, who had one bad year, horrible year, worst since 1864, maybe worst ever, because he would not intervene when state governments went awry, when bureaucrats made mask impositions, spacing impositions, don't go to church impositions, don't visit your family members in the hospital, don't drive so far. This was a curtailment of rights in all 50 states, even Wyoming, for God's sakes. This is not what a U.S. president who has Article 4 constitutional power to intervene in the name of literally republicanism. Donald Trump had that chance, and instead he let Pfizer get unlimited liability for, no liability for making a warp speed vaccine. This is not the kind of federal intervention. The best federal intervention is to let people decide. I'm a small government fan. And the best government is actually the government of a church or a government of a few families getting together. When they can decide how to govern the health of their lives, they get better decisions from it.
Thank you. Gerald,
Thank you. Also a less government fan myself. I think there are quite a few lessons learned from the whole pandemic, COVID. I think it was an extraordinary amount of government overreach in terms of schools, in terms of businesses, in terms of masks, mandates, how the church was treated, vaccine mandates, and I'll go like this on vaccine. So I think there's a lot to learn from there. I do think there was overreach, and don't ever want any that kind of overreach to happen again.
thank you very much. Gerald, you'll answer be the start for the next answer, and it's on economy. Our economy is in trouble. One reason is because of trillions of dollars of debt that we carry. Just looking at grocery costs, it appears that inflation is increasing on a daily basis. Much of the US manufacturing has been moved abroad. Taxes have become an extreme burden for many Americans and Vermonters. What would you do to support a higher standard of living for both Americans and specifically Vermonters?
Sure. Well, so there's many pieces to that. I would start off with some plain facts. 2019 to 24, the deficit gone up about 60%. It's unsustainable right now at about 36 trillion, about 125% of our GDP. I'm going against we're all going against Senator Bernie Sanders. He's been a member of Congress for 34 years. I did the research. Our national debt has gone up 1,100% on his watch. The tax and spend has to stop. That's it. That's where we are right now. We're at a $2 trillion a year clip. That $2 trillion a year is actually printing off money. As Milton Friedman talked about, increase the M2 money supply, you dump it into the economy, which we did back in 21 and 22, you're going to get inflation. So we have 40-year high inflation. We're still feeling the effects of it. I go grocery shopping. It is painful. I meet older folks that actually were retirees that come out of retirement to take a job or even two jobs just to make ends meet, to pay for meat, to pay for medicine. So, fiscal responsibility is part of it. It gets back into government policies also, like current administration, progressive left, day one tried to kill the oil and gas industry. I have an all the above energy solution approach because we can't afford to do that. So there's many things related to it. And, one thing I do want to do is try to bring well-paying jobs to Vermont. And I can do that at a lot of business experience. So that's one of the things I actually want to make Vermont friendly and not unfriendly. Taxes, tax cut and job backs, extend it because it lowered taxes for 80% of Americans.
Thank you. Mark.
Well, I am a libertarian, and most libertarians believe not just in cutting taxes, but ending federal personal income taxes. We can do this if you reduce the government spending, which I remind people is almost always wayward. The government screws up almost everything it does. And what it is entrusted to do, not that many things, frankly, it would do better if there were fewer expenditures on other things. Take care of justice, courts, take care of the military, although I think it's bloated. Those are the two essential things that we're entrusted to do, and that would cost about 20% of the 4.5 trillion that we spend right now. So at least the personal income tax should go away. Social Security should be optional. When you get rid of both of those, Vermonters instantly have a 30% pay increase, 30% more. That goes a lot to raising the standard of living. Bernie does not care about raising taxes. He admitted that last night. It's not even admission. It's almost for Democrats a stoking point. Yes, we like taxing people who are struggling to afford it. That is an attitude that must go away. And please, if you can visit stewartforliberty.com, and look at the 13 DVDs I have. DVD standing for Don't Vote Democrat, for the many reasons. And this is one of them. Elected Democrats, Bernie's endorsed by the Democrat Party, technically independent. He and every elected Democrat in the US Congress, they do not object to things that impose on us that they themselves would not do. They would not do a Green New Deal on themselves. They would not do defund the police, the silliest idea in Western civilization. They wouldn't do that. In fact, they have private security guards. So we know they wouldn't do that. But the rest of us have to fend for themselves. This is a hallmark of modern governance by Democrats who are elected. That is not what traditional Democrats, I'm one of them, pretty sure Justin do. That's not what we grew up with.
Thank you, Mark. Justin.
So I think that the question is a tough one. You know, what would we do to support a higher standard of living for Americans? And you talked about in kind of like the preamble to your question, you talked about inflation. You also talked about debt and debt spending. So for debt and debt spending, I don't really have an issue with that. I think the United States can afford to do some debt spending or get money from abroad as to get money from abroad. When you talk about inflation, I mean, I think that in part that has to do with government expenditures, and also in part that has to do with issues in the global economy and the supply chain. But the question when it comes to supporting a higher standard of living, as a senator, I would have the ability to vote on legislation that would impact the entire country. And so my objective, and I think it is good for Vermont if we kind of like nationalize things. If we had a high standard when it comes to minimum wage, if we had a high standard, if we gave benefits that is universal basic income, if we gave benefits in the form of free healthcare, free education, free housing, and we had that on a national level, the standard of living for Vermonters would increase. And I think that that is kind of the way that Vermont has to work with the rest of the country, is that if we want any kind of aid, we've got to get it from the federal government. And if we want to support a higher standard of living for our people, the best way to do it is to do it on a national level.
Thank you, Justin. All right, we're going to move on to the Great Divide. There appears to be a great divide between red and blue states. Large groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter seem to be in conflict with America itself. Just seeing the destruction in the cities like Portland, Oregon, and Detroit, Michigan are examples of such conflict. There appears to be, in general, a lot of congressional conflict on what is good and what is not good for the country. Okay, the question, Mark, would you start this, please? Do you have any suggestions or viewpoints on how to heal America and make it a better place to live in?
To some extent, what you're doing, Steve, moderating a forum of those who don't have a great voice yet, and with it, potentially elevating some not so well heard voices. Now, when those are elevated, it helps with a divide that is only far right or only far left. And I know we're not yet far, but there's media who'd like to see it pushed to the edge. If it bleeds, it leads. So bigger conflict is better. Those of us who want to bring a healing have a hard time when there's conflict out there. And I compliment Gerald for stepping over that divide and being what seems like a very encouraging candidate. I hope he'll be the next governor of the state. What I like to see is the possibility, if we don't make it back, if we don't have what I'll say is now 15 years old, the idea of e pluribus unum, I think, has gone away in the last 15 years. And if we don't make it back substantially, I am a secessionist, and secession is not an evil thing. It's letting pockets of people do what they want and not be at the gunpoint, because ultimately use of government regulations is ultimately force. Bernie, please realize that. When you restrict a business who wants to object, you're ultimately putting a gun at the head of the business owner who wants to do things his way. So, for those who want to have labor relations their way, those who want to have health care their way, those who want to do pensions their way, allow an opt out. And that's not state by state, it's more micro than that. Even Vermont, small state, is too diverse to take a whole state into red or blue, or what I would suggest, white. A combination. White is all colors combined. And those who just want to be left alone, it might be just one enclave in Burlington. It might be the whole Northeast Kingdom. And even though they're not contiguous, they could act under similar laws and always have the opportunity to opt out. Secession is plan B. I hope we can do plan A by the end of the decade. Hopefully all of you will help.
Thank you. Justin,
Well, I think that having forums like this is a way for different political views to come together and have a discussion. Um, and I think an audience that is hearing these political views, and we're not at each other's throats, we're not yelling over each other. I think that's good. I mean, I think having these kinds of discussions are necessary. And I think just having us participate, even if something as basic as that, improves democracy and improves accountability to government. And so what I would encourage people to do is to get involved at the local level, to be involved and to step up. And I know it's difficult, people don't have time, but to get involved in whatever way that they can in order to make a difference in their communities and in their political system. And I think the whole system as a whole will be better off as a result of that. And I think when people get out of their echo chambers, particularly when it's online, I think once they get out of that and they talk to people and they have discussions, I think that people realize, hey, even though we have different values, even though we have different opinions, there are ways to compromise. There are ways that we can come together, and there are ways that that we can move forward as a society and as a community.
thank you, Justin. Gerald,
Sure, sorry, had to move around here a couple of times here in the library, but
it's quite all right.
it's a great question. I tell you, it's one of the reasons I'm running for U.S. Senate, and I actually was at the Republican National Convention, and what I spoke about was Vermont's motto, freedom and unity. And one of the reasons I'm running, I can't stand how divided America is right now. I want us to come together back as one nation under God, indivisible. I actually tell young people one of the things they ought to be reading right now is the Gettysburg Address, because it's kind of where we are, and I don't like it. It's gone on for too long, and another part of that is balance. So, frankly, here in Vermont, we have a Republican government. We have a supermajority on the legislature. We have the same thing at the federal level with the socialists and too far left Democrats. So I talk about, moving back towards the center, being able to collaborate and work on the other side of the aisle, being able to develop solutions. I will tell you, frankly, I just had 3 debates against Senator Sanders. The angry rhetoric, and if you watch shows, you'll hear it. You'll hear it right there. And he speaks very disparagingly about a man who's just had 2 assassination attempts. That's got to stop, particularly from a United States senator sitting. So, one of the solutions, I think, is education. And I think we have to, get young people to start thinking, critically and start doing research and making their own decisions. Because, again, frankly, the mass media is giving people opinions and they're just kind of running with it. So I think education is the biggest thing, but I want to serve to develop solutions and stop all the division in our country, get back to being one nation under God.
Thank you, Gerald. All right, the next question is on gender. And Justin, you'll be the first speaker, if you would. I'll read the pro. There used to be only 2 genders. Sports used to be divided into male and female sports. It was believed only women could have babies. However, today's gender identity is blurred. Men are allowed to compete in women's sports activities. Schools, churches, our country's military now support multiple definitions of gender types. The medical profession supports medical intervention to create biologically born men into women, women into men, boys into girls, and girls into boys. What is your position on gender identity as it appears to stand today? Justin?
So our party takes a stance that says, it's really about freedom. It's about freedom of the individual to be who they are. And I think that we're talking about a couple different things here. First, when we're talking about adults, choosing what kind of gender they want to be, choosing how they want to express themselves, choosing how they want to associate, I think that's fine. I think it's about freedom. It's what makes this country great. And I think that when we talk about any kind of like blurred gender, I mean, I view it as it's a question of freedom. It's about allowing people to express themselves, and allowing people to be who they want to be. So I don't think that should be controversial. I think that's something that is consistent with America's tradition of being in favor of freedom of expression, especially for minority views. When you talk about medical interventions, I think that our party takes a stance that is in favor of medical interventions to even for those that are younger, to be able to be who they should be. And when we talk about sports, when we talk about all of those things, the way that I view it is that it's protecting the minority, and it's not about imposing anything on anyone else. So when we're talking about sports, it's not going to impact very many people. And so I'm not really concerned about the overall impact on sports. I'm more concerned about having freedom for that individual person.
Thank you. Gerald?
Sure. I too believe as a country is founded on individual freedom, we're all created with unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. So folks, my position really is that as an adult, make any kind of decision you want. What does concern me is about parents' rights. And I think, we have very young people making decisions, and I think the parents should be involved in that, because sometimes I think we've seen suicide rates, for instance, are spiked way up for folks that have made some decisions and then grow up and really regret that to the point that they take their own lives. That's a tragedy. So, in this issue, I look to have parents support parents' rights up until the age someone becomes an adult. Become an adult at 18, make any kind of decision you want in that respect.
Thank you. Mark?
What Justin evoked is, I believe, everything that Bernie Sanders agrees with. And I don't think Bernie Sanders, though, is sincere. He plays, and I know this is true of many elected Democrats at the federal level, they don't object to some ludicrous things. And I'm just going to say why it's ludicrous. We do protect minors. We keep 5-year-olds from playing on a fire escape. There is a responsibility that we have. And until they're of majority age, at least, when the wisdom of 3,000 years of civilization is fairly clear that some people will damage themselves if trying to emulate another sex that they're not, and regret it, they should listen to us. And there should be laws that keep MDs from mutilating minors. There should be, even outside of laws, the knowledge that there are people who have desisted from their whim, from surgeries that have taken place, and have gone wrong, and even surgeries that have taken place that have gone right. But now, 5 years later, they don't feel like the woman that they became and would like to go back to the male. There are only two sexes. There are only two, and Bernie Sanders knows this. So why do so many elected Democrats spout the line that there are as many sexes as people feel that exist? It's for political reasons. They play to certain big donors who love hearing that. They play to a still small group of voters. And they play to, unfortunately, a soon to be burgeoning group of voters called young kids who are being brainwashed in schools. The biggest damnation is that truth is going out the window along with some people's lives.
Thank you, Mark. Next topic is energy. Gerald, you'll be the next first speaker on this question, and I'll read the pro. The world is driven by energy. There are many sources of energy like solar, wind, hydro, fossil fuels, and nuclear. Today's fossil fuels are being blamed for some of the climate environmental problems. However, at the same time, batteries for transportation and windmills for electricity are complained about because of environmental caused problems as well. The question, do you have a position on what would work best for our country, especially what would work best for Vermont?
I do. I will call it all of the above. All those sources of energy that you mentioned, I'm fully in favor of developing them and utilizing them to meet our energy needs. Energy does make the world go round. And frankly, with the development of artificial intelligence, data analytics, our energy requirements might actually double in the next few years, frankly. So, we have one of the things I look to do as the United States Senator is ensuring the United States has energy independence, has independence in energy, critical technology, and food. For all those sectors, I've talked about developing an energy technology hub here in Vermont so that young people can stay in Vermont and develop clean, reliable, safe, and affordable energy solutions for the future. There's a lot of work to do. We're actually behind China. I do not support our government taking taxpayers and meddling in private sector in the open market. That's never going to work. We've wasted trillions of dollars on that, frankly, just in the last 4 years or so. So in all of the above approach, and energy independence is what I look to do for Vermont.
Thank you. Mark, would you respond?
I second what Gerald said. I don't like the government involvement in energy development. They don't do it as well. They are often influenced by selfish at minimum, evil in some cases, bad actors who don't necessarily want us to flourish. Bill Gates is now one of them. The government support comes often at the behest of small interest groups. That's not us. Okay, that's not even us as a state. Vermont gets overlooked in almost every federal policy, one, because it's small, and two, because it's all Democrat. And so Congress can take our possible objections for granted when they know they're still going to send a rep to Congress, and it's going to be very hard, sorry, Gerald, for someone to go get to Senate too. We get taken advantage of by the federal government. That has to end. Energy sources will proliferate when we don't have government involvement. And to those of you who have some disdain for Elon Musk, please recognize where he got his start. It was taking advantage of a dumb federal policy on solar. Okay? Solar power would proliferate without the government involved. Wind power, hydropower, they don't need the federal government. And whatever happened to nuclear power? I mean, what a shame that we closed down the Brattleboro, Vermont Yankee plant. Clean, provided lots of jobs, and provided energy to southern Vermont. Let's get rid of the government's involvement, in their case, some sort of weird fear of nuclear power. If nuclear power were named blue energy, instead of the fear sounding, ooh, nuclear weapon, I don't think we'd have a problem. But once again, emotions seem to govern when you're an elected Democrat. And I ask everyone here to stop listening to pleas for emotions and listen to reason. You're hearing it here from Gerald, me, and Justin. Stop paying attention to emotional pleas of elected Democrats.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, this is the last question, and we have some extra time.
Could I?
So there's no time limit on this. Oh, Justin, go ahead. I am so sorry. Go
Thanks.
ahead, Justin.
So energy it's a very interesting topic, and it's interesting because there's currently the energy that we have and the energy policies that we have, and I think that we need to adjust our energy policies to reflect a public policy goal to take carbon or to reduce carbon as much as possible in our energy sector, and also to we're going to have to take carbon out of the atmosphere as well. And I think that the United States should have that as their preeminent goal for very quickly in the future. I don't know how fast we can do that, how fast we can adjust our energy system to do that, but it must be done as fast as possible if we want to adequately respond to climate change for us and help the rest of the world adequately respond to climate change. Therefore, I would be in favor of nationalizing the energy grid. And the reason I would be in favor of that is because we need to get a large amount of infrastructure to carry energy from where it's produced to where it's needed. And currently, the United States is split up into various ISOs or energy grids that prohibit or that make it very difficult to transfer that energy from one seam to another seam. And the Supreme Court has also reduced the ability of the federal government to act on that because of two legal doctrines called the Major Questions Doctrine and another doctrine that reduces the amount of federal agency discretion that they have called Chevron deference. So I think that the U.S. needs to move very swiftly on this. And I think that we are running out of time to be able to make the adequate steps necessary to eliminate carbon in our energy supply and also take carbon out of the atmosphere.
Thank you, Justin. Now I'll go on to the last question, and it's a little bit different. Again, we have some extra time, and so there's no 2-minute time limit on this. I will limit it to 5 minutes max, and so we can sum this up in about an hour. And Justin, I apologize. You could have the opportunity to go first, and I'll read the question. Okay, the last question is to open or express whatever options you may have. Feel free to talk about any issues you think are important that were not brought up in this forum. Basically, express yourself in any subject matter you want. So the question, though, is if you were to win this election, what would you like to do and support that would make our country in Vermont a better place to live?
I would like to advocate for worker cooperatives at the federal level and worker-owned enterprises, and to help the United States shift every single business into worker-owned enterprises. And the reason that I want to do that is that the Green Mountain Peace and Justice Party believes that democracy at every level is key and paramount and important. And that includes in our workplaces, someplace that doesn't really have any kind of democratic input. And I think that it would make Vermont a better place to live because people could have buy-in to the places that they work. They would be able to democratically manage their workplaces. They would have time to have input as to, for example, who gets hired and fired. And I think it would help people keep money in Vermont too. Because instead of having someone in Florida or New York or New Jersey or California be able to say, hey, I don't want to keep my business in Vermont anymore. I want to focus on my business in California. If workers had the ability to decide for themselves whether or not their business has to go under, they might choose to take a pay cut or reduce costs instead of totally getting rid of the business. And I think as a result, we would be able to keep money and employment in Vermont, and we would be able to have a sense of empowerment for workers and democracy in our workplaces. So for that measure, I would like to promote a right of first refusal for all businesses in the country, which would basically give workers the ability to, uh, if the original owner is retiring or if the original owner wants to sell the business, they would be forced to by federal law to provide that option to the workers to say, hey, do you want to take this on? Do you want to take this business and make it your own? And I think that would make this country and Vermont a much better place to live.
Thank you, Justin. Mark,
My biggest goal would be a return to traditional Democrat values. Though I sound very conservative on lots of issues, I want people to recognize that I am probably the best candidate for the left because Bernie has left the left. He has only been in advance of the Biden administration on two absolutely unrealistic issues. You'll see those on stewartforliberty.com. Please recognize where he has abandoned, and so has every every elected Democrat, because they become stooges for the Biden administration. They have abandoned worker rights in favor of big corporations. They favor Pfizer. They favor Monsanto. They favor big tech. And the defense budget hasn't gone down, so Raytheon is exceptionally happy there. They are big on siding with management and shareholders, not workers. Management and shareholders tend to be bigger donors, so they're in this very bad communion. To the left, who would like to see traditional Democrat issues get elevated. Independents now do that better than your stooge elected Democrats. Those who contend that Black Lives Matter have to really look at what Democrats have done that harm African American people. Over the last 15 years, Black success has not improved. And that's in part because Democrats are not favoring small business. And yet African Americans start small businesses at a higher rate than any other group. Yes, they're the ones who in localities will stop a young woman from a hair braiding business because they require $2,500 or 2,500 hours. That's more like $30,000 of classes for her to just set up a local business. Black education matters, but they don't seem to care because they're in the hands of the teacher unions that have disdain for urban education. Urban education is deficient. And more often, African Americans are subject to that worse education, and they don't do anything about it. One easy thing. It's called vouchers and school choice. Black parents want this. And who's in the way? Largely white, established people in cities. Black safety matters. And that's not helped when you have policies that either defund the police or handcuff the police from doing good work in crime-ridden neighborhoods. Black workers matter. And yet, the immigration policy or non-policy that Biden has brought in unskilled people that compete for jobs often more frequently against African Americans who find themselves at lower salaries or no job at all. And finally, Black babies matter. And the pro-abortion lobby has harmed Black expansion. And I want African Americans to recognize you would be 30% of America today if we did not have the pro-abortion. It's 12.5% now. It would be 30% African American, but for this horrible teaching that unfortunately African Americans more than anyone else take wrongly advantage of and snuff out babies. Black Lives Matter in Africa far more, or they're more in jeopardy in Somalia and Eritrea, and where Boko Haram is harassing Nigerians and Chad people in Mauritania. But you don't hear African leaders here talk about or helping them. So it's another chimera. It is another talking point that gets votes, sometimes gets donors, and I hope everyone here will see through. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark. And Gerald, you have the honors of being the last one.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for this forum. It's been great. You know, I mentioned earlier, I decided to run because Vermont's become unaffordable, unsafe, and a place to leave. I can't stand that. I love our brave little state. So really, my objective would be to make Vermont affordable, or return Vermont to being affordable, safe, and a place to stay. And I've got some very solid ideas, realistic ideas to actually improve the economy and lower inflation through, you know, not massive overspending, to actually finally start to address our $36 trillion debt. It's absolutely unsustainable. It is actually threatening Social Security, threatening Medicare, threatening Medicaid. I'm not in favor of cutting any of those, but they're being threatened now because we keep overspending. So that's one piece. The safety piece, we have a wide open border, have for a long time, except now it's fentanyl. No one's traveled around Vermont more than I have. I've engaged about 75,000 Vermonters. I've walked Burlington, Brattleboro, Bennington, Rutland, St. Johnsbury, Springfield. They're all in deep trouble with a fentanyl crisis. Not a small problem, a crisis. Every parent out of there ought to be alarmed and frankly, deeply disturbed that your Congress has allowed that to happen. I want to secure our borders, start actually supporting our law enforcement agencies and supporting law enforcement, get rid of the progressive prosecutor movement, and actually start putting some sanctions, serious sanctions on China and Mexico to start alleviating that fentanyl crisis that's here, the northern border and the southern border. You're getting to the end point. I want Vermonters to be able to stay. I've talked about creating, a job environment, particularly to develop energy solutions for our young people so they can stay, working with our Republican governor to make Vermont business friendly. It's business unfriendly. And overall, across the whole United States, actually having less government. We don't need more and more and more and more government and regulation. It's just burdening the working class. I'm the working class. I've been working for 40 years. And what I bring to the table, I'm a West Point graduate. I have an MBA, I have some other education relative to being a U.S. Senator. I am a veteran. I'm a combat veteran. I've served in Europe, Asia, Persian Gulf, Middle East, boots on the ground. I've actually been a part of foreign policy that delivered peace. We don't have that now. So I look to impact foreign policy. To get right to it, my opponent, he's had his chance. 34 years is a member of Congress. As I mentioned, that debt's gone up 1,100%. He's done one and only one bill of significance. He did two post offices. He's done one bill. He co-sponsored that. That was 10 years ago. As a comparison, Senator Leahy did 80 bills. Senator Sanders has done 3 total, one of significance, of 10 years ago. He's not delivering results for Vermont or America. Frankly, they're false promises. And as we talk about, look at the last 4 years, the 40-year high inflation, we're still feeling it. 2 new wars, wide open borders, many other issues going on, $36 trillion debt. It really, what this is all about is a time for change. It's time for change. It's time for balance. And I will say here at the state legislature in Vermont and at the federal level. I think it was Mark mentioned earlier, the supermajority. Wait till you get your heat bill next year, okay? When your energy costs go up by $2 to $4 per gallon, okay? That supermajority at both levels is not looking out for the interest of the everyday Vermonter, everyday American. I will. So it's about balance, and it's about the actual representation for your welfare, not to promote welfare, but to promote the general welfare. And then finally, the results. Again, my opponent, we're not getting results. We're getting grandstanding, we're getting complaining, we're getting false promises, we're getting talk. My 40 years of work experience has delivered results. Last piece is, Senator Sanders is hardly ever here. Let's be honest with ourselves. I just did 3 debates against the man. I was surprised he did those. I appreciate that. But short of that, he's not around much. He definitely
He's going to Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wants
And
to
he's been to a whole bunch of other states. Let me just finish up, Justin. But he's not here. I've already promised, and I will, because I've seen me all over across the state. I'll visit each of the 14 counties at least once a year. I will stay there for hours. You, Vermonters, will get to meet me, and I will work your issue. That's called representation. It's not happening now. So I hope to have your consideration. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our forum. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you, Gerald Malloy, Mark Stewart, and Justin Schoville. It's been an honor to serve as moderator, and I hope you all have a real nice rest of the day. That's it.
Very nice. Thank you.
Okay, Cody.